Hi, I'm Laura Frank, President of News at Rocky Mountain PBS, and I'm here today with Ralph Smith, who is the Managing Director of the Campaign for Grade Level Reading. Ralph has spent a distinguished career as Senior Vice President at the Annie E. Casey Foundation and taught at the University of Pennsylvania Law School. But you're here today to talk about the importance of reading at grade level by the third grade. Ralph, why is that the key time?
Well, you know, there is a broad and deep consensus across the country that we need a generation of high school graduates who are prepared for college and university, who are prepared for the military service, who are prepared for a workforce that can compete in the global economy. None of that will happen if we don't get kids reading on grade level by the end of third grade, because what we know is that young children who can read on grade level by the end of third grade, they tend to graduate from high school, including low-income kids. Young children who do not read on grade level by the end of third grade tend not to graduate from high school, especially low-income kids. And the gap at third grade between low-income kids and their more affluent peers is a double-digit gap. And that represents what we call a slow-moving catastrophe. So we've really been focusing a lot of attention on making sure that we find ways to get all kids, especially low-income kids, reading on grade level by the end of third grade.
That's amazing, because it's almost like a crystal ball at a very young age. Third grade, you're very young. How old are you in third grade? 8 or 9 years old, maybe?
Just about.
So almost like a crystal ball to be able to predict the future if you can be reading at grade level. What kinds of things does the campaign do to try to ensure that that's happening?
Well, you know what happens when you go to fourth grade is that we expect a fourth grader to be able to read to learn. And that's why you hear people say, first you learn to read, and then you read to learn. That's when you put it all together, and at fourth grade, a child becomes a sort of an agent of their own learning. They become more of a co-author of their own future, and they do that by reading, and most of us did that. Well, what we found out is that for a whole lot of kids who are not reading in third grade, it's not about the school primarily. It's about the fact that they were so far behind when they got to school, they couldn't catch up. It's about the fact that too many of these children are missing too many days of school, and that leads to what we call chronic absence. And it's about the fact that too many kids lose too much ground over the summer. And when you start out behind, fall farther behind because of chronic absence, and lose ground over the summer, you're almost mathematically excluded from being on grade level by the time you get to the end of third grade.
So what you're talking about involves much more than a school system or a family system or a government system, but all of those working in concert somehow. Does the campaign recognize that and address that kind of coordination?
What we try to do is to help communities self-organize. And help communities self-organize by bringing together the folks who are concerned about very young children and who want to get them ready for school, who want to focus on early literacy and early learning, whether at home, in a child care setting, in a preschool program, or in kindergarten. The people who really know why kids are absent from school, and it has a lot to do with asthma, has a lot to do with transportation, has a whole lot to do with family mobility. And then all of us have a responsibility to children over the summer to make sure that it's more opportunity than risk. But in many communities, too many kids, especially low-income kids, find summer to be risky. They're unengaged, and they end up losing ground because of that. So when you think about readiness, attendance, and summer learning, you could understand why we need a broad cross-section of educators and civic leaders and community leaders and public officials and service providers working together within a community to change the situation for the better.
Now you have noted, or the organization has noted, some successes in Denver in Colorado. Maybe you could talk a little bit about those. I think Denver is about to get a pacesetter award. What is that?
Well, we smile when we think of Denver and when we think of Colorado. First of all, across the state of Colorado, there are a number of organizations here that have been doing great work for so long that they've taught us all and inspired us all. And we're hoping that we're going to get a chance to recognize some of those organizations, including the local United Way, including the work that's being done at the Boulder Housing Authority to bring school home. We have a whole list of organizations too long to mention. Denver has been especially interesting to watch because not only have the voters in Denver passed an early childhood or we live preschool program, but they reaffirmed that. And because of that, Denver leads the country in terms of the willingness to take civic action to allow kids to have an early opportunity. With respect to the work, what Denver has managed to do is to find a number of ways to bring programs together. So we're not just looking at one program, we're looking at a cluster of programs which are being, we call it aligned and stacked and bundled to increase the prospects for success with kids. And the local Denver funders really deserve a lot of credit for what they're doing. And we're delighted that we're able to recognize Denver as a pace setter for the campaign for grade level reading.
What are the local funders doing, if you could let our audience know about that?
One of the big things they're doing is working together. You know, a lot of us who spend any time in philanthropy note that most of us in philanthropy miss kindergarten. Playing well with others is not a core competency. Here in Denver, you have a number of foundations who are playing real well with each other, and therefore learning with each other and being able to get more success than you're finding in most cities around the country. In Denver, we have people who are practicing what we call more than money philanthropy. They're not just bringing a check, they're bringing credibility, they're bringing expertise, they're bringing technical assistance, they're bringing consulting support, and they're bringing leadership. All those add up to success and all go well for the future of Denver's kids.
And is that something that's that you haven't seen before in other places to the level that it's happening here? Is that what you're saying, that it's really something unique within?
You know, I know it's politics to say good things in the community you're visiting, but it is true that there's something special here in Denver that is different from what we see in most communities across the country, and a number of us are looking at Denver and learning.
Do you think it will become a model for others to follow?
We should hope. We should hope.
Ralph, there's something that people refer to as the roadmap that is significant and underlies all of this. Can you tell us what that is and what impact it's having?
What Denver has done, and what's been really exciting to watch from outside Denver, is to harness all of the organizations and the talent to bring public agencies and private firms and social sector organizations and really answer the question, how do we get from where we are to where we want to go? And this project, which they have appropriately called the Roadmap Project, represents the best effort in this city to form a comprehensive and continuous plan to move children from really before they're born, right through their early years into the early grades toward success. it is probably as comprehensive and well done as any program in any community, any place in the country. And it's been wonderful to watch it develop over the past several years. And it's just about the point now where it's launched. But what I like about the launch is that the folks in Denver are not launching it and celebrating, pretending as if the work is done. They've launched it, they're celebrating, and they're very conscious of the fact that the work is just beginning.
Ralph, are there some examples of these kinds of programs that stand out to you?
You know, in addition to focusing a lot of attention on parents and on health as critical determinants of early school success, one of the things we've learned as a campaign is we've got to really pay attention to technology, and we've got to find ways for technology to help us reach families that are considered hard to reach and really be part of high-touch, high-tech support and intervention. And right here in Denver, in fact, really close to home, we've got a great example. Bright by 3 is an organization we've been watching and following for a long time. And the Bright by Text program, which has really become their signature, has really emerged as a great example of using technology to nudge parents, but more than nudge parents, to reach parents all over the state. And I tell you, this is really being gonna be replicated elsewhere. And what I recently learned is that I think there are about 8,000 plus households all over the state, including and especially rural communities, where parents are getting the information they need and the tools they need to do a better job with their kids. And that's one of the contributions I think that we're going to find and be able to list and hold up as especially Colorado, and it's an example of Colorado's leadership in this area.
And you're probably aware we're particularly familiar with that example that you raise here at Rocky Mountain PBS because we work with Bright by 3 on that program to get information out to parents to help them with the different developmental stages. You know, we're sitting here in the Rocky Mountain PBS studios, and reading is very dear to our hearts here, despite the fact that we're a television station.
Those of us who follow public television across the country, and I do personally as well as my colleagues, have great affection for what's happening here in this locale at Rocky Mountain. We find, along with a half dozen other public television stations across the country, that you represent the best of what public media could do and become for the work we're doing. And I can't tell you the number of times we have called upon you and your staff to come back to DC, to come to Baltimore, to go to some other place to participate in panels, to tell about the work and to inspire others to copy it.
The campaign has a goal of 1 million more children reading at grade level by 2020. How are things going toward that goal?
Things are going well, and it is likely that we may be able to hit the mark. The problem is that what we've learned as we've done this work is that we will see more children reading at grade level by 2020. But we're finding that we may not close the gap by 2020. That in fact, for low-income children, they are doing better, but kids who are not low income are doing better still. Example, Over the last few years, we've seen a 4-point increase in the number of low-income kids who are reading on grade level. We've seen a 7-point increase in the number of other kids who are reading. So the irony is, while we're making progress, the gap may be growing. So what you will see and hear us doing over the next several years is shifting attention and focus away from just the number of kids who are reading better, but really whether we're closing the gap. And that now is the more important objective of the campaign.
And has that growth in reading changed over time? In other words, a 7-point growth or a 4-point growth, is that larger than we've seen in the past? Are we getting better at getting kids to grade level? We just need to make sure that those who were at the bottom of the list are moving faster than they have been in the past. Is that right?
Actually, it is better. We had a plateau for almost a decade. And the increased attention to literacy generally and early reading in particular is having an effect. It is having an effect, but not as large an effect as we need, and it's not happening quickly enough for low-income kids.
I see. You are having a convening here in Denver. Tell us a little bit about that, what the goals are, and who's going to be present.
Well, this is really a homecoming to Denver. We were here in 2012 with the All-American City Awards, which is sponsored by a local Colorado organization, the National Civic League. This is the most prestigious civic award in the nation. And in 2012, we joined with the National Civic League to recognize the communities that had the best plans. We're back 5 years later to recognize the communities that made the most progress. And we have a total of 27 communities that are finalists for the All-American City Awards. And come Friday morning, June 16th, we will know whether a dozen or 12 or 14 or 15 of them actually end up being All-American City Award communities, and we're really anxious to see and hear that. But we feel as if we've closed the loop by starting here in Denver, and 5 years later coming back to applaud the work that was launched right here.
What are some of the core approaches that you're taking to try to move kids up those ladders of reading levels? What are some of the things that are really working generally?
What we're finding is, of course, making sure that kids have high quality preschool is an important piece of the puzzle. Similarly, ensuring that kids have high quality childcare, that's part of the puzzle as well. Making sure that the transition from the early years to the early grade works, and that kids don't fall between the cracks and off the ledges when they move from one setting to another. Really building a strong workforce in the early years and maintaining a strong workforce in the early grades. Those are all things that are coming together. But as importantly, we're finding that paying attention to parents, helping parents realize their fondest aspirations for their own children, and equipping them with the tools, the information, and the supports they need to do a good job for their own kids. That's also helping as well. And lastly, paying attention to healthy child development. Kids who come to school with bad vision and can't see the board, bad hearing and can't hear the teacher, unable to pay attention, these kids are not going to do well, and we're finding that communities that organize to pay attention to the health of their children are doing better than communities who don't.
What haven't I asked you about that you think would be an important point for people to understand about this whole large picture of of grade level reading, of making sure kids are on track to be able to learn to read, to learn?
You know, as a former law professor, I love that question because we prefer questions to answers. But here's what we try to do. We try to get communities to self-organize, which means that the community first has to acknowledge that there's a problem or a challenge. And then the community has to decide that this is one they're willing to take on. And what we tried to do was, in connection with communities, develop a process that's organized around having a community say, we know what the problem is and we agree. We know where we want to go. We have some ideas to how we want to get there. We know who's got the data, and we're willing to persuade them to become not just data holders, but data contributors. We've got the right people in the room and around the table, and we're willing to invest the time and patience to build the capacity and the long-term strategies needed. We find that communities that are willing to make those commitments are moving forward, and communities that aren't are not.
If someone is watching this and what you're saying is really speaking to them, I care about kids being able to read, I want to make sure the workforce and the health and all of the things that are related to having a good education are what they could be at the highest level. How could people find out more and get involved?
Well, the classic answer is go to the website, but let me give you an even better answer. Call David Shapiro. In fact, tell him that I said to call him at EPIC, that statewide organization. They're leading the campaign, and he's leading the campaign here in Colorado on our behalf. And I think that he would welcome hearing from folks in Colorado who feel that this is really a challenge that Coloradans can take on and a problem they can solve.
For those who aren't familiar with EPIC, would you give us a little bit of more information about it?
It is really one of the premier business organizations. It's an organization of business executives who've really come together to focus their resources and talent and attention on young children. And they have been, I think they're more than a decade-old now, year-old organization here in Colorado. And it is one of the few organizations in the entire country where executives say, you know, we belong to a whole lot of organizations, but we need one that allow us to focus on young children. And those of us across the country have been following EPIC now for a decade, and we believe that their leadership in Colorado will make a difference.
Very good. Well, for those folks who want to learn more about the Campaign for Grade Level Reading, you can visit the website. It is gradelevelreading.net. That's gradelevelreading.net. Ralph Smith, thank you so much for being here with us today.
Oh, thank you.
You're welcome.
Enjoyed it thoroughly.
Me too.